The first gunshot came when Abigail Thornton was carefully arranging peach preserves on the general store's shelf. The glass jar nearly slipped from her fingers as the sound echoed down Main Street, followed by raucous laughter and more shots fired into the air. Black Hawk, Colorado was normally peaceful in the late afternoon of 1878, but today was payday at the silver mine, and Cole Callahan was back in town. Abigail steadied the jar and tried to ignore the commotion outside. Mr. Jenkins, the store owner, moved to the window and shook his head disapprovingly. "That Callahan boy is nothing but trouble," he muttered. "Sheriff ought to run him out of town for good." "He seems to enjoy making a spectacle," Abigail replied, keeping her voice neutral despite her racing heart. She had arrived in Black Hawk just 3 weeks ago to live with her aunt after her parents' passing, and already she'd heard countless warnings about the dangerous cowboy. Spectacle. "That man's left 3 men dead in as many years," Jenkins said, turning to look at her with genuine concern. "You stay clear of him, Miss Thornton. That's no ordinary roughness. The man's got the devil in him." Abigail nodded obediently, but curiosity pulled her to the window beside him. Through the dusty glass, she could see a tall figure dismounting from a magnificent black stallion. His movements were fluid and confident as he tied the horse to a post. Even from a distance, Cole Callahan cut an imposing figure in his dark hat and duster, with a gun belt slung low on his hips. "I have no intention of making his acquaintance, Mr. Jenkins," she assured the storekeeper, though she couldn't look away as the cowboy strode toward the saloon across the street. Just then he looked up, and for a fleeting moment his eyes locked with hers through the window. Abigail felt her breath catch. His face was striking all sharp angles and sun-weathered skin. A scar ran along his jawline, adding to his dangerous appearance. He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement before disappearing into the saloon. "Better finish up those shelves, Miss Thornton," Mr. Jenkins said, breaking her trance. "I'd like to close early today, what with all the rowdiness likely to follow." Abigail nodded and returned to her work, but her thoughts remained fixed on the mysterious Cole Callahan and the warnings that seemed to follow his name like shadows. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Abigail rose early to help her Aunt Martha prepare breakfast before heading to work at the general store. As she pinned her chestnut hair into a neat bun, she couldn't help but think about the cowboy she'd glimpsed yesterday. "You're awfully quiet this morning," Aunt Martha observed as she set down a plate of eggs and biscuits. "Something troubling you?" Abigail hesitated. "I saw Cole Callahan yesterday. Everyone seems quite frightened of him." Aunt Martha's face tightened, and for good reason. "That man has brought nothing but grief wherever he goes. They say he killed a man in Deadwood just for looking at him wrong." "Surely that's just town gossip," Abigail said, though uncertainty colored her voice. "Perhaps some of it, but there's truth at the core." "Cole Callahan worked for your uncle once before." Martha paused, her eyes clouding with the memory of her late husband. "William said he was the finest horseman and the quickest shot he'd ever seen, but dangerous, unpredictable, like a mountain lion that's decided to walk among men." Abigail frowned. "If he's so terrible, why does Sheriff Miller allow him in town?" "Because he hasn't broken any laws here, not yet, and because the Callahan Ranch provides good business for Black Hawk. But mark my words, Abigail, that man carries darkness with him. Promise me you'll stay away." "I promise," Abigail said, though the vow felt strangely hollow on her lips. After breakfast, she made her way to the general store, enjoying the crisp morning air and the bustling signs of Black Hawk coming to life. Miners trudged toward the mountains, merchants opened their shops, and a stagecoach rumbled down the main road, stirring up dust in its wake. As she approached the store, Abigail noticed a commotion near the livery stable. A horse, a magnificent Palomino, was rearing and bucking, nearly trampling the stable boy who was desperately trying to control it. Without thinking, Abigail hurried toward the scene. "Stand back," a deep voice commanded just as she approached. Cole Callahan materialized from inside the stable, moving with startling grace for such a large man. Abigail froze, watching as he stepped calmly toward the panicking horse, speaking in low, soothing tones. The animal's ears perked forward, its wild eyes fixed on Callahan. Easy now, girl, he murmured, his voice unexpectedly gentle. No one's going to hurt you. The transformation was remarkable. The horse, which had been moments away from bolting, began to settle under his quiet words. Callahan extended a hand, and after a moment of consideration, the Palomino nudged it with its muzzle. There we go, he said, stroking the horse's neck. Just needed to know you're safe, didn't you? Only then did he seem to notice Abigail still standing there. His eyes, a startling blue against his tanned skin, assessed her with frank interest. Miss, he acknowledged with a slight nod. That was impressive, Abigail said before she could stop herself. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Just need to speak their language. Animals are honest creatures. Unlike people. His directness caught her off guard. Up close, Cole Callahan was even more striking than he had appeared from a distance. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his shirt. The scar along his jaw looked like a knife wound, healed but permanent. Despite his rough appearance, there was an intelligence in his eyes that she hadn't expected. I'm Abigail Thornton, she said, offering her hand before remembering all the warnings she'd received. Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps before he removed his glove and took her hand. His palm was calloused but his touch unexpectedly gentle. Cole Callahan. His voice changed when he said her name, the rough edges softening. Abigail, you're new to Black Hawk. Yes, I arrived 3 weeks ago. I'm staying with my Aunt Martha Thornton. Recognition crossed his face. William Thornton's widow, I worked for him once, so I heard. Abigail hesitated. You have quite a reputation in town, Mr. Callahan. He released her hand, his expression closing off. I expect I do. He turned his attention back to the horse, adjusting its bridle. You should get on with your day, Miss Thornton. Wouldn't want folks talking about you being seen with the likes of me. The dismissal stung more than it should have. I'm capable of deciding for myself who I speak with, Mr. Callahan. His eyes met hers again, a hint of amusement in them. Are you now? He tipped his hat slightly. Well then, Abigail, have a good day. Again, she noticed how her name sounded different in his mouth, softer somehow, like he was savoring each syllable. Before she could respond, he led the horse deeper into the stable, leaving her with an unsettled feeling that had nothing to do with fear. When Abigail arrived at the general store 10 minutes later, Mr. Jenkins was already eyeing her with disapproval. I saw you talking to Callahan, he said without preamble. That's not wise, Miss Thornton. He was calming a horse at the livery. We merely exchanged greetings, she replied, hanging her shawl on a hook. Jenkins shook his head. That man has a way with animals, I'll grant you that, and with women too. But don't be fooled. There's a reason they call him Cold-Eyed Cole in these parts. Abigail tried to reconcile the gentle way Callahan had spoken to the horse and to her with the fearsome reputation that seemed to follow him. Perhaps people misjudge him. Perhaps you're too quick to trust, Jenkins countered. Did your aunt not warn you about him? She did, Abigail admitted. But the store door swung open, the bell above it jangling. Both Abigail and Jenkins turned to see Sheriff Miller enter, his weathered face looking more lined than usual. Morning, Jenkins. Miss Thornton. He nodded to each of them. Thought you should know there's been trouble up at Callahan's ranch. Someone shot 2 of his horses last night. Good Lord, Jenkins muttered. He must be on the warpath. The sheriff nodded grimly. He suspects it's the Hargroves. There's been bad blood between those families for years. I'm heading up there now to try and keep the peace, but he sighed heavily. Just thought I'd warn you folks. Might be best to stay clear of both Callahan and the Hargroves for a few days. After the sheriff left, Jenkins turned to Abigail with a pointed look. Still think he's misjudged? But Abigail was thinking about the tenderness in Callahan's voice when he'd soothed the frightened horse and the barely concealed pain in the sheriff's words. Whoever Cole Callahan was, he cared deeply for his animals. What kind of man would someone be to shoot them? The day passed slowly, with fewer customers than usual coming into the store. By late afternoon, Abigail was reorganizing a display of dry goods when the bell over the door rang. She looked up to see her friend Sarah Miller, the sheriff's daughter, rush in, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Have you heard? She asked, hurrying to Abigail's side. There was nearly a gunfight on Main Street. The Hargrove boys came to town looking for Callahan, but Papa managed to send them away before anything happened. Thank goodness for that, Abigail replied, genuinely relieved. Sarah lowered her voice. They say Callahan's got a list of men he means to kill, that he's been tracking them for years. The Hargroves are on it because their father killed his brother back in '71. That seems hard to believe, Abigail said, remembering how Cole's voice had softened when he'd said her name. Well, believe it, Sarah insisted. Everyone knows Cole Callahan's out for blood. Papa says he's the most dangerous man in the county. Abigail wanted to argue but thought better of it. She had only spoken to the man once. What did she really know about him? As the day drew to a close, Abigail declined Sarah's invitation to join her for dinner, saying she needed to help her aunt. In truth, she found herself wanting solitude to sort through her conflicting impressions of Cole Callahan. The evening was settling in as she walked home, the mountains to the west turning purple in the fading light. Main Street was quieter now, with most of the day's business concluded. As she passed the livery stable, she heard a horse's soft nickering and, on impulse, turned down the alley alongside it. In the small corral behind the stable, Cole Callahan stood with the palomino from that morning, running a brush along its gleaming coat. He was speaking to it too softly for her to hear. There was something profoundly peaceful about the scene, the dangerous gunslinger tenderly caring for an animal as twilight gathered around them. He must have sensed her presence, for he looked up suddenly, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun before he recognized her. "Miss Thornton," he said, relaxing slightly, "seems you're making a habit of watching me with horses." Abigail felt her cheeks flush. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. I was just passing by." He continued brushing the palomino's flank. "No need to apologize, Abigail." There it was again, that softening in his voice when he said her name, like he was handling something precious. "You're welcome to watch if you like." "This is Duchess. She's going to a family up in Central City tomorrow." Abigail stepped closer to the fence. "She's beautiful. You seem to have a way with horses." "They don't judge," he said simply. "They respond to how you treat them, not to rumors or reputations." The statement hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Abigail found herself gripping the fence rail tighter. "I heard about your horses," she said quietly. "I'm very sorry." Cole's hand stilled for a moment, and when he looked at her, the pain in his eyes was raw. "Thank you. They were good animals, didn't deserve what happened to them." The sheriff said it might have been the Hargroves. His jaw tightened. "It was. How can you be sure?" "Because I've known Tyler Hargrove all my life, and he's been trying to get even with me since we were boys." Cole set down the brush and moved to stand closer to the fence, closer to her. "But I expect you've heard all sorts of things about that feud." Abigail met his gaze directly. "I've heard many things about you, Mr. Callahan, most of them quite terrifying." To her surprise, he laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face. "And yet here you are, talking to the big bad wolf." "Are you? A wolf, I mean." His smile faded, and he studied her with an intensity that made her heart race. "What do you think, Abigail?" The way he said her name made it difficult to remember all the warnings. "I think," she said carefully, "that I don't know you well enough to judge." Smart answer. He reached for his hat, which was hanging on the fence post, and placed it on his head. "It's getting dark. Let me walk you home." Alarm flashed through her. "That's not necessary, and my aunt would have a fit if she saw me bringing you to her door," he finished for her. "I know, but it's not safe for a woman to walk alone after dark, not even in Black Hawk. And I'd be safer with you." She couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Despite what you've heard, I've never harmed a woman or a child in my life, and I'd kill any man who tried." The cold certainty in his voice sent a shiver down Abigail's spine. She believed him, despite everything she'd been told. "Very well, thank you." They walked in silence for a few minutes, Cole keeping a respectful distance between them. Abigail was acutely aware of the looks they received from the few people still on the street: surprise, disapproval, concern. "You're damaging your reputation," Cole said quietly, "being seen with me." "I doubt one walk will ruin me completely," she replied with more confidence than she felt. He glanced at her, a hint of admiration in his expression. "You're not what I expected, Abigail Thornton." "What did you expect?" someone who'd believe everything they heard about Cole Callahan without question. They reached the corner of Pine and 4th Street, and Abigail stopped. "My aunt's house is just there," she said, pointing to a neat white house with blue shutters. "I should go the rest of the way alone." Cole nodded, understanding. "Good night, then, and thank you." "For what?" "For talking to me like I'm a man, not a monster." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, but Abigail found herself calling after him. "Mr. Callahan," he paused, looking back at her. "Are all the stories about you false?" His expression grew serious. "No," he said honestly. "Not all of them." With that enigmatic answer, he walked away, leaving Abigail with more questions than before and a strange fluttering in her chest that she didn't dare examine too closely. Over the next 2 weeks, Abigail found herself looking for Cole whenever she went about town, though she told herself it was merely caution that made her scan the streets for his tall figure. Twice she saw him, once outside the bank, deep in conversation with a man she didn't recognize, and once riding out of town at dawn, his silhouette outlined against the rising sun. Each time she felt that same inexplicable flutter in her chest, and each time she firmly suppressed it. Whatever her growing fascination with Cole Callahan, she knew it could lead nowhere good. The entire town seemed determined to warn her away from him, with new stories of his violent past surfacing daily. "Did you hear about the time he shot a man in Leadville for cheating at cards? They say he killed 3 men in a knife fight in Laramie. I heard he once worked as a bounty hunter and brought in 12 men all dead." The tales grew more outlandish with each retelling, but at their core was always the same message. Cole Callahan was dangerous, unpredictable, and not to be trusted. Yet Abigail couldn't reconcile these stories with the man she'd met, the man whose voice softened every time he said her name, whose gentle hands had calmed a frightened horse, whose eyes held pain when he spoke of his murdered animals. One afternoon, as Abigail was making deliveries for Mr. Jenkins, a sudden thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains. She hurried to complete her task, but by the time she started back to the store, the rain was falling in heavy sheets, turning the dirt streets to mud. She took shelter under the awning of the assayer's office, hoping the downpour would ease. "Miss Thornton," a familiar voice called. She turned to see Cole Callahan approaching, leading his black stallion. "You're getting soaked." "It caught me by surprise," she admitted, wiping rainwater from her face. Cole assessed the situation quickly. "My ranch is closer than town. Let me take you there until the storm passes." Abigail hesitated, alarm bells ringing in her mind. Going alone to Cole Callahan's ranch would be the height of impropriety. "I don't think that would be appropriate, Mr. Callahan." "Probably not," he agreed, "but it's better than catching your death out here. I give you my word as a gentleman, whatever's left of one, that you'll be safe." Another crack of thunder punctuated his words, and the rain intensified. Abigail knew she should refuse, but the sincerity in his eyes made her decision for her. "Very well," she said, and before she could reconsider, Cole had lifted her easily onto his horse and swung up behind her. The ride to Callahan's ranch was both terrifying and exhilarating. Abigail had never ridden so fast, and certainly never with a man's arms around her to steady her. She could feel Cole's solid chest against her back, his breath warm against her ear as he occasionally murmured encouragement to the horse. Despite the rain soaking them both, she felt a different kind of heat building within her. The Callahan Ranch appeared suddenly as they crested a hill, a substantial property with a main house, barn, and several outbuildings. Cole guided the horse directly to the house and quickly helped Abigail dismount under the shelter of the porch. "Let me see to Thunder and I'll be right in," he said, gesturing toward the door. "It's unlocked." Abigail hesitated only briefly before entering the house. She found herself in a surprisingly comfortable living room with sturdy furniture and a stone fireplace where embers still glowed. Books lined shelves along one wall, not what she'd expected from a notorious gunslinger. She was examining the titles when Cole returned, water dripping from his hat and coat. "You should get out of those wet clothes," he said, then quickly added, "I mean, I have a robe you could wear while they dry." Abigail felt her cheeks flush. "I'm fine, really." Cole removed his hat and ran a hand through his damp hair. "At least come sit by the fire, I'll build it up." As he knelt to add logs to the fireplace, Abigail noticed a photograph on the mantel, a handsome couple with a young boy between them. She moved closer, curious. "My parents," Cole said, following her gaze. "That was taken a year before they died. Cholera outbreak in '62. "I'm sorry," Abigail said softly. "You look like your father." "So they tell me." He stood, brushing his hands on his pants. "My mother was the gentle one. Dad had a temper, taught me how to shoot and fight almost before I could walk." "And is that what made you?" She trailed off, unsure how to phrase it. "What made me cold-eyed, Cole?" He finished with a wry smile. "No, that came later, after the war." Abigail watched as he moved to a cabinet and pulled out 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. "You fought in the war." He nodded, pouring a small amount into each glass. "Union Army. I was just 17 when I lied my way in. Saw things no boy should see." He offered her one of the glasses. "It changes a man, war does." Abigail accepted the glass but didn't drink. "Is that where you got your reputation?" Cole took a sip of his whiskey, his blue eyes intent on her face. "Part of it. The rest came after, when I was riding with a hard crowd, made some enemies, did some things I'm not proud of." "Like what?" She surprised herself with her boldness. He studied her for a long moment. "You really want to know, don't you? The truth, not the stories." "Yes," she admitted. "I do." Cole gestured to a chair and Abigail sat, her wet skirts heavy around her ankles. He remained standing, leaning against the mantel. "I've killed men," he said bluntly. 7 of them. 3 in self-defense, 4 who deserved it for one reason or another. I was a bounty hunter for a while, bringing in wanted men. Some came alive, some didn't. I've been in more fistfights than I can count, and I've spent more nights in jail cells than I care to admit. He paused, watching her reaction carefully. When she remained silent, he continued. "But I've never shot a man in the back, never killed for money or pleasure, and I've been trying these last few years to live a quieter life. This ranch was my uncle's, left it to me when he passed. I'm trying to make something of it." Abigail absorbed his words, trying to reconcile this confession with the man standing before her. "And the Hargroves, is it true they killed your brother?" Pain flashed across his face. "Yes, Jacob was 19, caught Tyler Hargrove rustling our cattle. Tyler shot him and claimed it was self-defense. His father being who he was, the law believed him." "I'm sorry," Abigail said again, meaning it. "That's a terrible loss." Cole's expression softened as he looked at her. "You're an unusual woman, Abigail. Most would be running for the door by now." She met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps I should be, but I don't believe you mean me any harm." "I don't," he said, his voice dropping lower. "Quite the opposite." The intensity in his eyes made her heartbeat quicken. Before she could respond, a loud knock came at the door. Cole's hand immediately went to his gun, his entire demeanor shifting in an instant from open to guarded. "Stay here," he instructed, moving cautiously to the door. When he opened it, Sheriff Miller stood on the porch, rain dripping from his hat. "Callahan," the sheriff nodded curtly. "Miss Thornton's aunt is worried sick. Someone saw you riding out of town with her." Abigail quickly stood and moved to the door. "It's all right, Sheriff. Mr. Callahan was kind enough to offer shelter from the storm. I was making deliveries and got caught in the rain." The sheriff's expression remained skeptical. "Well, I've got my wagon outside. I'll take you back to town now, Miss Thornton." "The storm," Cole began, "is letting up," Miller interrupted firmly. "Come along, Miss Thornton, your aunt is waiting." Abigail glanced at Cole, seeing the resignation in his eyes. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Callahan," she said formally. "Anytime, Abigail," he replied, and despite the sheriff's presence, his voice still softened on her name, sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with her damp clothes. As Sheriff Miller drove her back to town, he didn't mince words. "That was foolish, Miss Thornton. Going alone to Callahan's ranch." "He was being a gentleman," she defended. "I was stranded in the rain," Miller sighed heavily. "I don't doubt he behaved properly. For all his faults, Callahan's never been known to mistreat women, but his enemies won't care about that. They'll just see you as a way to hurt him." Abigail frowned. "I don't understand. The Hargroves, for one, they've been looking for ways to get at Callahan for years. If they think he cares about you—" The sheriff let the implication hang in the air. A chill that had nothing to do with her wet clothing settled over Abigail. Surely they wouldn't harm an innocent woman just to spite him. You don't know the Hargroves, Miller said grimly. Besides, it's not just them. Callahan's made enemies all over Colorado territory. Some very dangerous men would love to find his weakness. He glanced at her meaningfully. And he's looking at you like you might be exactly that. Abigail didn't respond, but the sheriff's words echoed in her mind long after he delivered her to her aunt's house, where Martha was indeed waiting with worry and reproach. Of all the men in Black Hawk, her aunt lamented after the sheriff had gone, why did you have to get involved with Cole Callahan? I'm not involved with him, Aunt Martha, Abigail protested, though the warmth in her cheeks suggested otherwise. He simply helped me when I was caught in the storm. Martha shook her head. Doesn't matter, people saw you riding with him, they'll talk. Let them talk, Abigail said with sudden defiance. Mr. Callahan has been nothing but courteous to me, her aunt studied her with worried eyes. Oh, my dear, you're falling for him, aren't you? Don't be ridiculous, Abigail replied too quickly. I barely know the man. But as she changed into dry clothes and went about her evening chores, Abigail couldn't deny the truth of her aunt's observation. Despite all the warnings, despite his own admission of his violent past, she was drawn to Cole Callahan in a way she'd never experienced before. His voice saying her name played through her mind like a melody she couldn't forget. The next day at the general store, Abigail felt the weight of curious stares and whispered comments. Mr. Jenkins was coolly professional, but she could sense his disapproval. By midday, she had endured enough sidelong glances and abruptly ended conversations to last a lifetime. When Sarah Miller came into the store, her expression was a mixture of concern and excitement. Is it true? She whispered, pulling Abigail to a quiet corner. Did you really go to Callahan's ranch alone? The sheriff was there, Abigail replied defensively. Nothing improper happened. Sarah's eyes widened. But you wanted it to, didn't you? Oh, Abigail, tell me the truth. What's he like? Is he as dangerous as they say? Before Abigail could answer, the store door opened again, and Tyler Hargrove sauntered in with two of his brothers. Tall and broad-shouldered like Cole, but with none of his grace, Tyler had a reputation nearly as fearsome. His eyes, small and dark beneath heavy brows, scanned the store until they landed on Abigail. Well, if it isn't Callahan's new lady friend, he drawled, approaching them with a predatory smile. Heard you had quite the adventure yesterday, Miss Thornton. Abigail straightened her spine, refusing to be intimidated. Mr. Hargrove, I don't believe we've been introduced. No need for formalities. He leaned closer, his breath smelling of tobacco and whiskey despite the early hour. I just wanted to see what kind of woman catches cold-eyed Cole's attention. Must be something special about you. That's enough, Tyler, Mr. Jenkins called from behind the counter. State your business or leave my store. Tyler ignored him, his eyes never leaving Abigail's face. You know what he is, don't you? A killer, a man with blood on his hands, my brother's blood. Your brother died 7 years ago, Sarah interjected boldly. And everyone knows he was stealing cattle when it happened. Tyler's expression darkened dangerously. Watch your mouth, girl. Your father won't always be around to protect you. Is that a threat, Mr. Hargrove? A deep voice came from the doorway. Cole Callahan stood there, his hand resting casually near his holstered gun, his eyes cold as winter. The tension in the store escalated instantly. Tyler turned to face Cole, his hand similarly positioned near his own weapon. His brothers moved to flank him, creating a wall between Cole and Abigail. Just having a friendly chat with your lady friend Callahan, Tyler said with a smirk, telling her what kind of man she's keeping company with. Miss Thornton is a respectable woman who was caught in a storm, Cole replied evenly. I offered her shelter, that's all there is to it. Tyler laughed, an ugly sound. That's not how folks are telling it. They say you've been sweet on her since she arrived in town, say you go soft as butter whenever you say her name. Abigail saw a muscle twitch in Cole's jaw, but his expression remained impassive. My dealings with Miss Thornton are none of your concern, Hargrove. They are when you're trying to play the gentleman after what you did to my family. Tyler took a step closer to Cole. Does she know you swore to kill every Hargrove man before you're done? Does she know what you really are? Cole's eyes flicked briefly to Abigail, and in that moment, She saw something vulnerable beneath his hard exterior concern for her, perhaps even fear of what she might think. "I know enough," Abigail said clearly, stepping forward despite Sarah's attempt to hold her back. "I know that Mr. Callahan has been nothing but honorable in his conduct toward me, which is more than I can say for your behavior today, Mr. Hargrove." Tyler's face reddened with anger. "You've got her fooled good, Callahan, but it won't last. Sooner or later, she'll see what everyone else knows: you're a rabid dog that needs putting down." Cole's hand tightened on his gun, but before the situation could escalate further, Sheriff Miller entered the store. "That's enough," he said firmly. "Tyler, you and your brothers need to move along." "Cole, what are you doing here?" "Came to make sure Miss Thornton got home safely yesterday," Cole answered, his eyes still locked with Tyler's. "Good thing I did." The sheriff looked between the two men, clearly assessing the volatile situation. "Hargrove's out now. Cole, you can state your business and then be on your way." For a moment, it seemed Tyler might defy the sheriff, but finally he backed away. "This isn't over, Callahan," he muttered as he and his brothers moved toward the door. "Never thought it was," Cole replied coolly. After the Hargroves left, a tense silence filled the store. Mr. Jenkins busied himself with rearranging items that didn't need rearranging. Sarah remained beside Abigail, her eyes wide with excitement and trepidation. "Miss Thornton," Cole said, finally turning his full attention to her. "I wanted to make sure you suffered no ill effects from yesterday's rain." "I'm quite well, thank you," Abigail replied, aware of the sheriff and others watching their exchange. Cole nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small book. "You were looking at my library yesterday. Thought you might enjoy this one." Abigail accepted the book, a collection of poetry by Tennyson, with surprise. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Thought you might appreciate something to read during the next storm." His voice softened as he added, "Take care, Abigail." With a nod to the sheriff and Mr. Jenkins, Cole turned and left the store. Abigail clutched the book to her chest, feeling the weight of everyone's stares. "Well," Sarah breathed, "that was inappropriate," Sheriff Miller finished sternly. "Miss Thornton, I understand you're new to our town, but you need to be more careful. The feud between Callahan and the Hargroves is deadly serious. I don't want to see you caught in the middle of it." "I have no intention of being caught anywhere, Sheriff," Abigail replied with as much dignity as she could muster. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." As she moved behind the counter to assist Mr. Jenkins, Abigail tried to ignore the churning in her stomach. The confrontation had been frightening, yes, but what troubled her more was the realization that despite all the warnings, despite the clear danger, her heart had leapt when Cole Callahan walked through that door. That evening, Abigail sat in her bedroom, reading by lamplight from Cole's book of poetry. His thoughtfulness touched her deeply. He had noticed her interest in literature during her brief time at his ranch. It suggested a depth to him that contradicted his fearsome reputation. A gentle knock on her door interrupted her reading. "Come in," she called, quickly closing the book. Aunt Martha entered, carrying a cup of tea. "Thought you might like this before bed," she said, setting the cup on Abigail's bedside table. Her eyes fell on the book. New reading material. Abigail hesitated. "Mr. Callahan lent it to me." Martha sat heavily on the edge of the bed. "So the rumors are true. He came to see you today." "Only to ensure I hadn't caught cold from the rain," Abigail explained, though she knew how flimsy the excuse sounded. "Abigail," her aunt said gently, "I know you're a grown woman of 23. I can't tell you who to associate with, but please understand what you're risking. Not just your reputation, but your safety." "I don't believe Cole Callahan would ever harm me," Abigail said firmly. "It's not him I'm worried about," Martha sighed. "It's what happens to those who get close to him. The Hargroves are vindictive men, and there are others who bear grudges against Callahan if they think you matter to him." "The sheriff said something similar," Abigail admitted. "Because it's true." Martha reached out to take her hand. "Your uncle respected Cole's skills, but he also knew he was a man marked for violence. It follows him like a shadow, even when he tries to outrun it." Abigail looked down at the book of poetry, thinking of the contradiction that was Cole Callahan, the dangerous gunman who read Tennyson, the hard man whose voice softened when he said her name. "I understand your concern," she said at last. but I can't help feeling there's more to him than his reputation suggests. Martha studied her niece's face. You care for him already, don't you? I barely know him, Abigail protested weakly. Sometimes it doesn't take long, Martha said with a sad smile. I knew your uncle was the one for me the first time he laughed. Just be careful, my dear. The heart doesn't always choose wisely. After her aunt left, Abigail returned to the poetry, but the words blurred before her eyes as she contemplated her aunt's warning. Was she being foolish? Was her attraction to Cole Callahan nothing more than a naive fascination with danger? She thought of how his eyes had sought hers during the confrontation with Tyler Hargrove, how concern for her had briefly overshadowed his anger. That wasn't the look of a heartless killer. It was the look of a man who cared. Outside, the night was cool and clear, stars twinkling in the vast Colorado sky. Abigail moved to the window, gazing out at the distant mountains silhouetted against the horizon. Somewhere out there was Cole Callahan's ranch, and somewhere in her heart, a decision was being made that she wasn't fully conscious of yet. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the previous day's storm leaving the world washed clean. Abigail dressed for church with particular care, selecting her best blue dress and arranging her hair in an elegant twist. Aunt Martha raised an eyebrow at her niece's efforts, but made no comment. The small church at the edge of town was nearly full when they arrived. Abigail felt the weight of curious stares as she and her aunt made their way to a pew near the middle. Sarah Miller caught her eye and smiled encouragingly, but others were less welcoming. Mrs. Jenkins deliberately turned away, and Abigail heard whispers behind raised hands. The service had just begun when the church door opened again, and a hush fell over the congregation. Cole Callahan stood in the doorway, dressed in a clean black suit that made him look even more imposing than usual. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his stubble to a respectable shadow. For a moment, no one moved. Then Reverend Parker, ever the diplomat, smiled from the pulpit. "Welcome, Mr. Callahan. Please join us." Cole nodded his thanks and moved to an empty spot at the back of the church. Abigail resisted the urge to turn and look at him, but she could feel his presence like a physical force at her back. Throughout the service, Abigail found it difficult to concentrate on Reverend Parker's sermon about forgiveness and redemption. She was acutely aware of Cole sitting behind her, of the occasional murmurs his presence continued to generate. When the final hymn was announced, she allowed herself a glance over her shoulder and found his eyes already on her. He gave her the slightest nod, a gesture so subtle only she would notice it. After the service, congregants spilled out into the churchyard, forming small groups to chat in the pleasant morning sunshine. Abigail and her aunt were speaking with Reverend Parker when Cole approached them, hat in hand. "Reverend, Mrs. Thornton." He nodded to each before turning to Abigail. "Miss Thornton, I was hoping I might have a word." Before Aunt Martha could object, Reverend Parker intervened. "Perhaps you could walk Miss Thornton to the gate, Mr. Callahan. A public conversation should satisfy propriety." Martha looked like she wanted to protest, but instead gave Abigail a warning glance before allowing the Reverend to draw her into conversation with several other parishioners. Cole offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Abigail took it. They walked slowly toward the gate, aware of the eyes following their progress. "I'm surprised to see you at church," Abigail said quietly. "From what I've heard, it's not your usual Sunday activity." A faint smile touched Cole's lips. "Been a while," he admitted. "But I remembered something my mother used to say about seeking redemption." "And is that what you're seeking, Mr. Callahan? Redemption?" His blue eyes were serious as they met hers. "Among other things." They reached the gate and Cole stopped, turning to face her. "I wanted to apologize for yesterday. Tyler Hargrove would never have bothered you if it weren't for me." "You have nothing to apologize for," Abigail insisted. "Mr. Hargrove's behavior was his own choice." "Maybe, but this feud—" Cole shook his head. "It's cast a long shadow." "I don't want you caught in it." "Then why did you come to the store? Why give me the book?" Abigail challenged. Cole was quiet for a moment, his eyes studying her face as if memorizing it. "Because I couldn't stay away," he finally said, his voice dropping to that soft tone he seemed to reserve only for her name. Abigail, I know I have no right to pursue you. My life, my past, they make me the last man who should be standing here with you. But I haven't been able to get you out of my mind since the moment I saw you watching me through the general store window. His honesty took her breath away. Around them, the churchyard had grown quieter as people strained to overhear their conversation. Mr. Callahan, Cole, he corrected gently. If you're going to tell me to stay away from you, at least use my given name. Cole, she repeated, finding she liked the feel of it on her tongue. I'm not going to tell you to stay away. Hope flickered in his eyes, quickly tempered with caution. You should. Everyone in this town would tell you it's the smart thing to do. I'm aware of that, Abigail said, lifting her chin slightly. But I find I'm more interested in knowing you, the real you, than in listening to rumors and warnings. A true smile transformed his face then, making him look younger, almost boyish despite the scar along his jaw. You're either the bravest or the most foolish woman I've ever met, Abigail Thornton. Perhaps a bit of both, she admitted with a small smile of her own. Their moment was interrupted by Tyler Hargrove, who approached with several companions, his expression thunderous. Didn't expect to see you in God's house, Callahan. Figured you'd burst into flames if you tried to enter. Cole's smile vanished, his body tensing as he stepped slightly in front of Abigail. Sunday morning, Hargrove. Even you should respect the day enough to hold your tongue. Tyler's eyes narrowed. You're one to talk about respect, standing there with William Thornton's niece like you have any right to court a decent woman. Abigail felt her temper rising. Mr. Hargrove, I don't recall asking for your opinion on who I choose to speak with. Tyler ignored her, his focus entirely on Cole. You think putting on a clean suit and showing up at church will make folks forget what you are, what you've done? I don't expect anyone to forget anything, Cole replied evenly. Least of all me. Good, Tyler spat. Because I sure as hell will never forget finding my brother with your bullet in his chest. The churchyard had gone completely silent now, everyone watching the confrontation with a mixture of dread and morbid fascination. Reverend Parker started to move toward them, but Sheriff Miller got there first. That's enough, Tyler, he said firmly. This is hallowed ground. Take your grievances elsewhere. Tyler's face contorted with rage. Always protecting him, aren't you, Sheriff? Just like you did when he killed Ben. Your brother was rustling Callahan cattle, Miller replied, his patience clearly wearing thin. The territorial judge ruled it self-defense. Let it go. Never, Tyler hissed, his gaze returning to Cole. You wanted a war, Callahan, and you got one, but now you've got something to lose. His eyes flicked meaningfully to Abigail. Makes the game a lot more interesting, doesn't it? Cole's hand moved toward his gun, but Miller stepped between them. Not here, not now. Both of you back away. Tyler, you and your boys leave. Now. For a tense moment, it seemed Tyler might defy the sheriff, but finally he stepped back. This isn't over, Callahan, not by a long shot. With a last hateful glance at Abigail, he turned and stalked away, his companions following. The tension in the churchyard eased slightly, but the damage was done. People began to disperse, whispering among themselves. Abigail could feel their judgmental stares, hear the murmur of her name mixed with Cole's. I think I'd better take you to your aunt, Cole said quietly, a new weariness in his voice. Aunt Martha was already hurrying toward them, her face pale with concern. Abigail, we're leaving now, Mrs. Thornton, Cole began. I apologize for save your apologies, Mr. Callahan, Martha cut him off. I think you've done quite enough. She took Abigail's arm possessively. Come, Abigail. Abigail resisted for a moment, looking back at Cole. His expression was resigned, as if he'd expected nothing less. Go with your aunt, he said softly. It's for the best. She wanted to argue to defend him, but knew this wasn't the time or place. With a last apologetic look, she allowed Martha to lead her away from the church, from Cole, and from the whispers that followed them down the street. When they reached home, Martha's composure finally broke. Do you have any idea what you've done? She demanded, her voice shaking. Aligning yourself with Cole Callahan in front of the entire town, and after Tyler Hargrove's threat. I was merely speaking with him, Abigail protested. It was more than that, and you know it. Martha sank into a chair, suddenly looking older. You've made yourself a target, Abigail. Not just for gossip, but for real danger. Abigail paced the small sitting room. I can't believe Tyler Hargrove would actually harm me just to hurt Cole. Then you're being naive, Martha said bluntly. The feud between those families has consumed this town for years. It's cost lives. And now, because you've shown interest in Cole, you're part of it. That's absurd, Abigail argued, though doubt crept into her voice. Martha leaned forward, her expression earnest. Listen to me, Abigail. I knew Cole Callahan when he first came back to Black Hawk after the war. He was a young man trying to outrun his demons. Your uncle gave him work, tried to help him, but violence follows Cole like a faithful hound, not always of his making, but always finding him nonetheless. Abigail sat across from her aunt, suddenly weary. What happened? Between Cole and the Hargroves, I mean, the real story. Martha sighed heavily. It started before Cole even returned from the war. The Hargroves and Callahans were neighboring ranches, always competitive. When Cole's parents died of cholera, his uncle took over the ranch. Cole's younger brother Jacob stayed to help while Cole was fighting. There were disputes over water rights, accusations of cattle rustling on both sides. She paused, gathering her thoughts. When Cole returned in '66, things escalated. He was different, harder, more dangerous. A few months later, he caught Ben Hargrove on Callahan land with stolen cattle. There was a confrontation and Ben ended up dead. Cole claimed self-defense and the judge believed him, but the Hargroves never accepted it. And Jacob, Abigail prompted. Tyler mentioned Cole's bullet in his brother's chest. That was 2 years later. Jacob Callahan was found dead on the border between the two properties, shot in the back. The Hargroves claimed they had nothing to do with it, but everyone knew better. Cole swore vengeance. So both sides have lost someone, Abigail murmured. Martha nodded grimly. And neither side will let it rest. That's why I'm begging you, Abigail, stay away from Cole Callahan, not because he's a bad man, but because loving him could get you killed. The word loving hung in the air between them. Abigail wanted to deny it, to say it was far too soon for such feelings, but she couldn't bring herself to lie to her aunt or to herself. I'll be careful, she promised instead. Martha reached across to squeeze her hand. I hope that's enough. The following days passed in a haze of tension for Abigail. At the general store, customers were either overly curious about her connection to Cole Callahan or coolly distant. Mr. Jenkins remained professional but noticeably less friendly. Even Sarah Miller, while still supportive, seemed worried for her friend. Papa says the Hargroves have been drinking heavily at the saloon, she confided one afternoon when she came to the store, making threats against Cole. Abigail asked, arranging a display of canned goods with more force than necessary. Against both of you, Sarah said quietly. Tyler's been saying Cole's finally shown his weakness and he intends to exploit it. Abigail's hands stilled. I've barely spoken to the man. How could anyone think I'm his weakness? Sarah gave her a knowing look. Because of the way he looks at you, Abigail, like you're water and he's been in the desert for years. Everyone's noticed it, and the way his voice changes when he says your name. Heat crept into Abigail's cheeks. That's ridiculous. Is it? Sarah challenged gently. Are you saying you feel nothing for him? Before Abigail could answer, the store door opened and Sheriff Miller entered, his expression grave. He nodded to the girls and approached Mr. Jenkins at the counter. Might want to close early today, he said in a low voice that nevertheless carried in the quiet store. There's trouble brewing. The Hargrove boys just rode in with some rough characters from Leadville, and Callahan's in town too, Jenkins frowned. You think there'll be shooting? I'm doing my best to prevent it, Miller replied, but I'd feel better if folks were off the streets, just in case. The sheriff's eyes fell on Abigail and he moved toward her. Miss Thornton, I think it would be best if you went straight home. I'll escort you. Is this because of me? Abigail asked, a knot forming in her stomach. Because I spoke with Mr. Callahan at church. Miller's expression softened slightly. No, madam, this feud's been simmering for years, but I won't lie to you, Tyler Hargrove has taken a particular interest in you as a way to get at Callahan. And that makes the situation more volatile. Has Cole Mr. Callahan done something? Sarah asked. Not yet, Miller said. He's at the bank conducting legitimate business, but Tyler and his boys are watching the door, waiting for him to come out. A cold fear gripped Abigail. You have to stop them. If they're planning to ambush him, I'm doing what I can, Miss Thornton, Miller assured her. I've sent for my deputies and I've spoken to Tyler, but these men have 7 years of hatred between them. Sooner or later, it's going to come to a head. Then let me talk to Cole, Abigail said impulsively. Perhaps I can convince him to avoid a confrontation. Both the sheriff and Sarah looked at her in alarm. That's out of the question, Miller said firmly. The last thing we need is you in the middle of this. Now, please, let me take you home. Reluctantly, Abigail agreed, gathering her things while Mr. Jenkins began closing the store. As she and the sheriff stepped outside, she could feel the tension in the air, thick as storm clouds. Down the street, she could see several men loitering outside the saloon, watching the bank. Tyler Hargrove among them, his face set in hard lines. Keep your eyes forward, Sheriff Miller instructed, placing a protective hand on her elbow. Don't give them any reason to approach us. They were halfway to her aunt's house when the sound of a door opening made them both turn. Cole Callahan emerged from the bank, pausing at the top of the steps as he spotted the men waiting for him. Even from a distance, Abigail could see the way he squared his shoulders, his hand moving casually to rest near his gun. Keep walking, Miller urged, but Abigail was rooted to the spot, her heart pounding as she watched the scene unfold. Tyler pushed away from the hitching post where he'd been leaning, stepping out into the street. Callahan, he called, loud enough for his voice to carry up and down Main Street. Time we settled this, don't you think? Cole descended the steps slowly, deliberately. Not interested in settling anything today, Hargrove. Got business to attend to. Your business can wait, Tyler replied, his hand hovering near his holster. Unless you're too busy courting that Thornton girl to defend your honor. Abigail saw Cole's posture stiffen at the mention of her name. Leave Miss Thornton out of this, he said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. This is between you and me, Tyler smirked. Is it? Seems to me she's right in the middle of it now. Pretty thing, isn't she? Be a shame if something happened to her. Sheriff Miller swore under his breath, releasing Abigail's arm. Stay here, he ordered before striding toward the confrontation, his hand on his own gun. That's enough, both of you. This ends now. Abigail watched in horror as more men emerged from the saloon and other buildings, forming a loose circle around Cole, Tyler, and the sheriff. Some were Hargrove allies, others merely spectators to the drama unfolding on Main Street. Either way, the situation was spiraling out of control. Stay out of this, Sheriff, Tyler warned. This is long overdue. Not in my town, it isn't, Miller replied firmly. Cole, go on home. Tyler, you and your boys need to disperse. Now, for a tense moment, no one moved. Then Cole nodded slightly. All right, Sheriff, I'll leave. He began to back away, keeping his eyes on Tyler, his hand still near his gun, Tyler's face contorted with fury. Running away, Callahan, is that it? Being smart, Cole replied evenly. Another day, another place, not here, not now. He had almost reached his horse when one of Tyler's companions, a rough-looking man Abigail didn't recognize, drew his gun. Shoot him now, Tyler, while you got the chance. Before the man could raise his weapon fully, Cole's gun was in his hand, aimed with deadly precision. Don't, he warned, his voice colder than Abigail had ever heard it. Sheriff Miller drew his own weapon, pointing it at the stranger. Drop it. Everyone stand down. The street had frozen, a tableau of men with hands on or near their weapons, the tension so thick Abigail could barely breathe. She knew she should run, should find safety, but she couldn't move, couldn't tear her eyes away from Cole standing alone against multiple opponents, his face set in determined lines. The stranger glanced at Tyler, clearly seeking direction. Tyler hesitated, his eyes darting from Cole to the sheriff to his hired gun. Finally, he gave a slight shake of his head. Another time, he said, though the words seemed to pain him. Slowly, the stranger lowered his weapon. Cole kept his gun trained on them for a moment longer before holstering it with fluid grace. He backed toward his horse, never taking his eyes off the Hargrove contingent. As he mounted, his gaze swept the street and found Abigail standing frozen near the general store. Even at a distance, she could feel the intensity of his look, could see the concern in his eyes. He touched the brim of his hat in a brief salute before turning his horse and riding out of town at a controlled pace that somehow conveyed dignity rather than retreat. Only when he was out of sight did Abigail remember to breathe. Sheriff Miller was dispersing the crowd, his deputies having finally arrived to assist. Tyler and his companions disappeared back into the saloon, their postures radiating frustrated anger. The sheriff returned to Abigail, his expression grim. "Let's get you home, Miss Thornton, and then I think you and I need to have a serious conversation about Cole Callahan." Abigail nodded mutely, her mind still replaying the confrontation, the moment when violence had seemed inevitable. She had never seen Cole in action before, never witnessed firsthand the deadly skill and composure that had earned him his reputation. It should have frightened her. Instead, she found herself more drawn to him than ever, this complex man who could be so gentle with her, so tender when he spoke her name, yet so formidable when threatened. As Sheriff Miller escorted her home, she realized with startling clarity that despite all the warnings, despite the danger and the town's disapproval, she was falling in love with Cole Callahan. Aunt Martha was waiting anxiously on the porch when they arrived, her face pale with worry. "Thank goodness you're all right," she said, embracing Abigail tightly before nodding to the sheriff. "How bad was it?" "Bad enough," Miller replied grimly, "but no shots fired, no one hurt, this time." They moved inside, where Martha prepared coffee with shaking hands while the sheriff recounted the confrontation. Abigail sat silently, staring into her cup as if it might contain answers to her troubled thoughts. "I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation, Miss Thornton," Miller said finally, turning to address her directly. "Tyler Hargrove is not a man to be trifled with, and he's fixated on you now as a way to hurt Callahan." "Because Cole spoke to me at church?" Abigail asked, frustrated. "Because he lent me a book of poetry. This is absurd." "It's not just that," Miller said, exchanging a glance with Martha. "It's how Cole looks at you, how his voice changes when he says your name. Everyone's noticed it." "Sarah said the same thing," Abigail admitted, heat rising to her cheeks. "Because it's true," Martha said gently. "And because Cole Callahan has never shown interest in any woman in Black Hawk before you arrived, that makes you special. And dangerous." The sheriff leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I've known Cole for years. He's not the monster some make him out to be, but he's a man who's lived by the gun for a long time. Violence follows him, Miss Thornton. And now, because of his feelings for you, whatever they may be, that violence is turning in your direction." "What are you suggesting?" Abigail asked, a defensive edge to her voice. Miller sighed heavily. "I think it would be best if you left Black Hawk for a while, just until things cool down." "Leave," Abigail repeated incredulously. "This is my home now. I won't be driven away by threats and innuendo." "It's not just threats," Martha interjected. "Tyler Hargrove is dangerous, and he has friends who are even worse if they decided to use you to get to Cole." The implication hung heavily in the air. Abigail set her cup down with a sharp click. "So I should just run away? Let these men dictate my life with their foolish feud." "It's not foolish to them," Miller said quietly. "Men have died, Miss Thornton, more could follow." Abigail stood abruptly. "I need some air," she said, moving toward the back door. "Excuse me." In the small garden behind the house, Abigail paced among the late summer flowers, her mind whirling with conflicting emotions. The rational part of her knew the sheriff was right, the situation was volatile, potentially deadly. But another part, a part that grew stronger each time she thought of Cole, rebelled against the idea of running away. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn. Through the trees at the edge of the property, she could see a rider approaching Cole Callahan, his expression determined as he dismounted and tied his horse to a fence post. He spotted her in the garden and paused, removing his hat. "Abigail," he called softly, "I need to speak with you." She moved toward him, glancing back at the house to ensure they weren't observed. "You shouldn't be here. The sheriff and my aunt." "I know," he interrupted, "but I had to see you, to make sure you were all right." "I'm fine," she assured him, stopping a few feet away. Up close, she could see the tension in his face, the worry in his eyes. "But you nearly weren't. That man was going to shoot you." Cole shrugged slightly. "Wouldn't be the first time someone tried." His expression softened as he studied her face. "I'm sorry you had to see that. It's not how I wanted things to go." "What did you want?" Abigail asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He took a step closer, close enough that she could smell the leather of his coat, the faint scent of horses and open air that clung to him. "I wanted time," he said, his voice dropping to that gentle tone she'd come to cherish. "Time to prove to you, to the town, that I could be more than what they think I am. Time to court you properly, if you'd allow it." The simple honesty of his words took her breath away. Cole. "But Tyler's made that impossible," he continued, a flash of anger crossing his features. "He won't stop, Abigail, not until one of us is dead, and now he's targeting you to get to me." Fear gripped her heart. "The sheriff thinks I should leave Black Hawk." Cole nodded grimly. "He's right. It's not safe for you here, not while Tyler's fixated on using you against me." "And what about you?" she challenged. "Will you leave too, run from this feud?" "No," he said firmly. "This ends here one way or another. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of being the town's boogeyman. After today, I'm going to settle things with Tyler." Alarm flashed through Abigail. "You mean kill him?" Cole's expression was unreadable. "I mean end this, however it has to end, and if you die instead." The words caught in her throat, the possibility suddenly too real, too painful to contemplate. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he cupped her cheek in his hand. "Then at least I'll have known you," he said softly. "At least I'll have heard you say my name." Abigail leaned into his touch, her heart racing. "There has to be another way." "I wish there was," he murmured. His thumb traced lightly along her cheekbone, his touch reverent. "Abigail, I need you to go, stay with relatives in Denver, anywhere away from here, just until it's over." "And then what?" she whispered. "If you survive, if you kill Tyler, what then? Will the feud truly be over, or will his brothers seek revenge? Will it ever end?" Cole had no answer for her, and in his silence she read the truth. The cycle of violence would continue with or without Tyler Hargrove. It was a poison that had infected both families too deeply to be easily purged. "I can't leave," she said finally, her decision crystallizing as she spoke. "Not like this." "Abigail, no," she interrupted, placing her hand over his where it still rested on her cheek. "I won't run away. There has to be another solution, one that doesn't end with more bloodshed." Cole's blue eyes searched hers, a mixture of admiration and frustration in their depths. "You're either the bravest or the most stubborn woman I've ever met," he said, an echo of his words from the churchyard. "Perhaps both," she replied with a ghost of a smile. The back door of the house opened suddenly, and Aunt Martha's voice called out, "Abigail, are you all right?" Cole dropped his hand from her face and stepped back, though reluctance was written in every line of his body. "Think about what I said," he urged. "Please. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." Before she could respond, he turned and strode back to his horse, mounting with fluid grace and disappearing into the trees just as Martha rounded the corner of the house. "Was someone here?" her aunt asked suspiciously. Abigail hesitated only a moment before deciding on honesty. "Cole Callahan. He came to warn me, to ask me to leave town until the situation with the Hargroves is resolved." Martha's eyes widened. "He was right here in our garden." "Just for a moment," Abigail assured her. "He's gone now." Her aunt shook her head in disbelief. "That man has no sense of propriety. If someone had seen him here, your reputation would be ruined." "I think my reputation is already compromised, Aunt Martha," Abigail said with a sigh. "And honestly, that seems the least of my concerns right now." Martha studied her niece's face for a long moment. "You care for him a great deal, don't you?" Abigail couldn't deny it any longer, not to herself and not to her aunt. "Yes," she admitted, "I do. Oh, my dear girl." Martha's expression softened with sympathy. "Of all the men in Colorado, you had to fall for the most dangerous one." "Perhaps," Abigail agreed, "but also perhaps the most misunderstood." Martha didn't argue, but the worry in her eyes spoke volumes. "Come inside," she said instead. "The sheriff's still waiting to speak with you." Abigail followed her aunt back to the house, her mind made up. She would not leave Black Hawk, would not abandon Cole to face the Hargroves alone. There had to be another way to end this conflict, and she was determined to find it. The next morning, against her aunt's wishes and the sheriff's explicit advice, Abigail went to work as usual. The general store was quieter than normal, with many townspeople keeping to their homes after yesterday's near shootout. Mr. Jenkins watched her warily as she arranged a display of fall fabrics, clearly expecting trouble to walk through the door at any moment. Around midday, Sarah Miller entered the store, her expression a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "Abigail," she said, hurrying to her friend's side. "Have you heard the news? Cole Callahan has challenged Tyler Hargrove to a formal duel tomorrow at dawn on the field behind the schoolhouse." Abigail felt the blood drain from her face. "What?" "Papa just told me," Sarah continued. "Cole rode into town an hour ago and delivered the challenge personally. Said it was time to end the feud one way or another. Tyler accepted, of course. The whole town's talking about it." Mr. Jenkins approached, his earlier caution forgotten in the wake of this juicy gossip. "It's been years since we've seen a proper duel in Black Hawk," he said, a hint of macabre fascination in his voice. "Callahan must be confident in his skills to issue a formal challenge, or desperate to end this," Abigail said quietly. Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "Whatever his reasons, Miss Thornton, I'd advise you to stay far away from that field tomorrow. No place for a lady seeing men kill each other." "I have no intention of attending," Abigail replied, though her mind was already racing ahead, trying to formulate a plan. "If you'll excuse me, I think I need some fresh air." Before either Sarah or Jenkins could respond, Abigail hurried from the store, her heart pounding in her ears. Cole had issued the challenge because of her, she was certain of it. He was trying to end the feud quickly, decisively, to protect her from Tyler's threats. But in doing so, he was risking his life. Without conscious thought, her feet carried her toward the sheriff's office. She found Miller at his desk, looking more careworn than usual. "Miss Thornton," he greeted her with a tired nod. "I expect you've heard the news. Is it true?" she asked, closing the door behind her. "Cole and Tyler are going to duel tomorrow," Miller sighed heavily. "I'm afraid so. Callahan made it official seconds, formal rules, the whole thing. Said it was time to settle the matter honorably once and for all." "And you're allowing this?" Abigail demanded, anger and fear making her voice sharper than she intended. "Dueling isn't technically illegal in the territory," Miller explained, though he didn't look happy about it. "And frankly, it might be better than the alternative Tyler ambushing Cole or vice versa, with innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire." "But one of them will die," Abigail protested. The sheriff looked at her steadily. "One of them was always going to die, Miss Thornton." This feud was never going to end any other way. The finality in his voice struck her like a physical blow. "There has to be another solution," she insisted. "Some way to break the cycle of violence." "If there is, I haven't found it in 7 years of trying," Miller replied wearily. "The best I can do is ensure the duel is conducted according to proper rules, with no interference from either side." Abigail sat heavily in the chair across from his desk. Do you think Cole has a chance?" Something like sympathy flickered across the sheriff's weathered features. "Callahan is fast, one of the fastest I've ever seen, but Tyler's no slouch with a gun either." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Miss Thornton, I understand your feelings for Cole, but I strongly advise you to stay home tomorrow. This is no place for you to be." "I have no intention of watching men try to kill each other," she assured him, though her mind was already forming a different plan. "Thank you for your time, Sheriff." As she left the office, Abigail's determination solidified. She would not sit idly by while Cole risked his life. There had to be a way to stop this duel, to end the feud without more bloodshed. And if the men wouldn't find it, perhaps a woman could. That evening, after ensuring her aunt was occupied with her sewing circle, Abigail slipped out of the house and made her way to the livery stable. The owner, Mr. Peterson, was a kindly older man who had shown her nothing but respect since her arrival in town. "Miss Thornton," he greeted her with surprise. "What brings you here so late?" "I need to borrow a horse, Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It's urgent," Peterson frowned. "Does your aunt know you're here?" "No," Abigail admitted, "but this can't wait. I'll return the horse before morning, I promise." The old man studied her face for a long moment before sighing. "This wouldn't have anything to do with tomorrow's duel, would it?" Abigail hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Yes, I'm trying to stop it." "By riding out to Callahan's ranch," Peterson guessed shrewdly. "Yes," he shook his head. That's not safe, Miss Thornton, especially not at night. The road's treacherous in places and there are coyotes, sometimes worse. I have to try, Abigail insisted. I can't just sit by and let this happen. Peterson sighed again, deeper this time. I can see your mind's made up, but I won't let you go alone. My boy will accompany you. Tommy, he called toward the back of the stable. Saddle up Daisy for Miss Thornton and get Thunder for yourself. A young man of about 20 emerged from the back, looking curiously at Abigail. Yes, Pa, you're escorting Miss Thornton to the Callahan Ranch, Peterson instructed, and bringing her back safely afterward. Tommy's eyes widened. Tonight, with the duel tomorrow? That's why we're going, Abigail explained. I'm trying to prevent it. The young man looked skeptical but obediently began saddling the horses. Within minutes, Abigail found herself mounted on a gentle mare, with Tommy alongside her on a sturdy gelding. Be careful, Peterson admonished as they prepared to leave. And Tommy, you stay with Miss Thornton every minute, understand? Yes, Pa, the young man assured him. The night was clear and cool, the road visible enough in the bright moonlight. Abigail rode in determined silence, rehearsing in her mind what she would say to Cole when she saw him. Tommy seemed content to ride quietly beside her, respecting her need for thought. The Callahan Ranch appeared after about an hour's ride, its buildings dark silhouettes against the starry sky. A dog began barking as they approached, and a moment later the front door of the main house opened, light spilling out onto the porch. Cole emerged, rifle in hand. Who's there? He called, his voice tense. It's Abigail Thornton, she replied, urging her horse forward, and Tommy Peterson. We mean no harm, she heard Cole swear softly as he lowered the rifle. Abigail, what the hell are you doing here? She dismounted, handing the reins to Tommy. I need to speak with you, privately. Cole hesitated, then nodded. Tommy, take the horses to the barn. There's feed and water there. He turned to Abigail, his expression a mixture of concern and something else, something warmer. Come inside.